This is David Leffler, the host of Fumed. Before we get started, consider donating to Public Health Watch, the nonprofit news outlet that produced this podcast. Investigative reporting is expensive, and we need your support to keep it going. Go to publichealthwatch.org to contribute. Thank you. There's a special kind of fear that fills your body during a natural disaster. It paralyzes you, reminds you just how small and helpless you are when the power's out and nobody's coming to save you. Greg Moss was filled with that fear on the morning of August 28th, 2017. Hurricane Harvey had made landfall on the Texas coast. Now, the Category 4 storm was stalled over Houston.
For a third brutal day, torrential rain, people rescued from flooded homes, volunteers with boats pitching in, the river still rising.
More than 50 inches of rain had already fallen in parts of Harris County. Roads had become rivers. Entire neighborhoods were underwater. Hundreds of thousands of people were without power. Things were especially perilous for the 45,000 residents of Channelview, which borders the San Jacinto River. That 20-mile stretch of water is sandwiched between the Gulf of Mexico, where hurricanes often gather force, and Lake Houston, a man-made reservoir that's protected by an enormous dam. During heavy storms, the dam's gates are opened to keep nearby businesses and upscale neighborhoods from flooding. When that happens, walls of water hurl downstream toward Channelview.
We are just east of Houston in Channelview. Homes were just ripped off their foundations and moved several yards. Cars, boats, and trucks were thrown around like they were bathtub toys.
Flooded oil refineries and chemical plants released as much as 5 million pounds of pollutants into the air during the storm.
Greg Moss's low-lying neighborhood, the river bottom, was ground zero in Channelview. From his deck, he watched floodwaters 10 feet high sweep through his property. His workshop and everything inside it was in ruins. His raceboat was destroyed. So was his car and his truck. Greg didn't have flood insurance back then. He'd never imagined a storm so extreme that water would penetrate his manufactured house. It stood on a hill and 5-foot stilts. But this storm was different.
It just kept coming up and up and up and up. When it got up on that middle deck, I was, it's not going to stop.
Greg leashed up his black lab, Lucky, and started hoping for a miracle. An hour later, a team of firefighters pulled up in a rubber motorboat. A video they took shows Greg, soaked white hair pressed against his forehead, with Lucky close beside him. His deck looks like a pier on a lake. His manufactured home looks like a houseboat.
I took a drone and my camera and a pistol with me and some clothes, and I was gone, you know.
As the boat pulled away, Greg watched familiar landmarks, including the beloved Riverside Inn restaurant, disappear beneath a sea of brown water. He couldn't help but wonder what kind of chemical cocktail might be brewing in that murky abyss. I'm David Leffler. From Public Health Watch, this is Fumed, an investigative podcast about the people who live in the shadows of America's chemical plants and oil refineries. This season, a group of stubborn Texans try to salvage what's left of their working-class community. That's a problem, though, because they live in East Harris County, where the petrochemical industry calls the shots. By the time Hurricane Harvey arrived, two of those stubborn people, Greg Moss and Carolyn Stone, had been fighting back for years, each in their own way. In this episode, they joined forces as a new wave of man-made and natural disasters threatens their beleaguered community. Part 3. Battle Cry. Carolyn rode out Hurricane Harvey in South Channelview, down the river from Greg. She and her husband, Bobby, knew how to prepare for storms. They froze gallons of water and tea and baked chocolate chip cookies. Then they set up their camping stove and some lanterns in the living room so they'd be ready when the power went out.
It was whipping and whistling and, it was loud howling outside. The house is creaking because our house is wood up on blocks. I was expecting the house to be carried away.
But Carolyn had more to fear than wind gusts or floodwaters. The once placid stretch of river across the street was now lined with at least 60 enormous barges. Some of them were stacked side by side, like Tetris pieces. Many were filled with volatile chemicals. If a fire ignited, the barges could become floating bombs.
We had watched the tugboats and barges, the lights and stuff, as the water rose, they rose. It was a lot of movement and crashing and crunching.
It was the not knowing that scared Carolyn most. If the state or county had a plan for what to do during chemical emergencies, nobody had shared it with her. Residents were on their own. When the skies finally cleared, Carolyn's entire block was in shambles. But at least the barges docked across the street seemed intact. That's where Harley Marine had built its headquarters, despite Carolyn's desperate attempts to block the construction. It wasn't until later that Carolyn learned just how close to catastrophe she had been.
We found out that barges had been breaking loose from upriver and coming down, as they described it, in platoons of 13 or more. I know there was a storm raging on, but at no point before, after, during, did anyone come over and say, hey, we have this issue going on. It might be safer if y'all left.
That disturbing revelation, shared in Harley's email newsletter, sticks with Carolyn to this day. She dodged a bullet that time, but she lived in Channelview, where big storms and floods are as common as high school football games on Friday night. Hurricane Harvey showed Greg something too. It proved that his fears about the two toxic waste dumps near his home, the San Jacinto River Waste Pit's Superfund site, were justified. One pit is just south of the Interstate 10 bridge. The other is just north of the bridge, close to Greg's house.
Harmful and dangerous chemicals may have washed down rivers from a Houston area Superfund site during flooding from Hurricane Harvey. The EPA says an unknown amount of chemicals linked to birth defects and cancer may be in the water.
The flooding had damaged the temporary protective cap on the northern waste pit. The U.S. Environmental Protection Agency later found that cancer-causing dioxin had poured into the San Jacinto at levels 2,000 times higher than the threshold that requires an emergency cleanup. The storm devastated Greg financially. It would cost about $50,000 to replace his car, truck, boat, and tools. Money he simply didn't have. But the implications of Hurricane Harvey's destruction worried him even more. What if a runaway barge spilled hazardous chemicals into the river? And what if those chemicals were mixed with the dioxin-laced sludge in the waste pits? Houston meteorologist Matt Lanza worries about that too. He's the managing editor for the website Space City Weather. He also moonlights as a disaster preparedness consultant for petrochemical companies along the Houston Ship Channel. It sits just below Channelview and is the heart of one of the world's busiest seaports. Lanza told me that if a hurricane made a direct hit on the ship channel, the U.S. economy could plummet.
All these outcomes are bad. They're bad outcomes for not just Houston, but for the country. You can't view those as a weather problem. That is a national security problem in every sense of the word.
The human cost of such a catastrophe could be even greater. The thousands of chemical plants, refineries, and barges along the channel could create a giant toxic stew.
My concern is not so much like the Fukushima type thing where it's just completely completely unlivable, uninhabitable over a wide area, but it will be for a time. It's like taking Superfund sites and multiplying them and adding a whole bunch more to the list, right?
How you doing? All right. How are you?
By this time, late 2017, Greg had been fighting for more than 5 years to get the northern waste pit cleaned up, without much success. It was covered with a temporary cap in 2011, but not much had been done since then. Still, Greg felt hopeful. He was working with Jackie Young, the woman from nearby Highlands whose nonprofit kept goading regulators to act. She'd gotten married since they met and was now Jackie Metcalf.
Thank you all for joining us tonight. I want to go ahead and get started.
Her meetings were drawing big crowds. Personal injury lawyers, residents from neighboring communities, even the EPA was paying attention. Greg was Jackie's eyes in the sky. He'd spent more than $1,000 replacing his old drones with machines that could fly further and were fitted with high-resolution cameras.
See the barges? That's the riverside, and that's the barges. Zooms in.
Jackie used Greg's pictures at her meetings. She also used them to make sure the companies responsible for cleaning up the waste pits were doing what they were supposed to do.
One time she's saying, oh, they're down there digging all this stuff up and doing all this testing. I says, no, that's bullshit. That excavator's outside the damn thing digging. And she says, can you prove it? Well, hell yeah, I can. Here's a picture,
Carolyn's fight was still a very private one at this point. She was still fighting Harley Marine, which had built its headquarters across the street from her house, along with a wharf big enough to serve a half-dozen tugboats and a collection of chemical barges. It didn't make sense. Her deed literally said, no noxious or offensive industry, business, or activity shall be carried upon any lot. But finding a lawyer willing to take on Texas's most powerful industry in its own backyard wasn't easy. By the spring of 2018, she had contacted almost 50 lawyers. Most turned her down right away. Some sent her to other lawyers. A few set up appointments to visit with her and Bobby. But none of them showed up.
Now, one of them, and there was really no explanation. It's just a short, quick conversation, not even a conversation, just saying, we've decided not to handle this.
Why didn't Carolyn just give up? I've asked her that question a few times. Sometimes she'd talk about the principle of the thing. Right is right. In her eyes, what Harley Marine did and what the government allowed was wrong. But a more painful reality drove her too. Like so many Channelview residents, she and Bobby had no escape, no nest egg to pick up and start new someplace else. If their house had been on the water, rather than across the street from the water, they could have sold out to a barge company and moved on, as others had done. But the barge companies didn't need their land, and the very presence of the barges had made their home almost unsellable. They'd paid $43,000 for it in 1988. In 2018, it was worth just $30,000.
When you're fighting to save your quality of life, your health, your sanctuary, what do? You have to keep going. I mean, you don't have a choice. I wasn't sleeping because if I wasn't on the phone talking to somebody, I was on the computer trying to find laws or another lawyer.
Carolyn isn't a very religious woman. But she sees the chain of events that began in June of 2018 as a sign from the heavens. One day, a copy of the local newspaper showed up in her driveway, even though she hadn't subscribed to the paper in years. Inside was a flyer saying that a group she'd never heard of, the Texas Health and Environment Alliance, was having a meeting that night about the waste pits. It was being held in Highlands, a town just a few miles northeast of Channelview, in less than 2 hours. She rushed inside and told Bobby to get ready. The parking lot was packed when they arrived. Inside, people were standing because they'd run out of seats. Carolyn watched a young woman with long blonde hair walk to the front of the room. Everyone got quiet.
Here was this young little girl, and I had no idea how old she was, but she looked like 17, leading this room full of people. And she had the EPA, I think the Army Corps was there. It seems like everybody, or a great number of people who have been a great help, were at that meeting that night.
For Carolyn, seeing Jackie Metcalf was living proof that advocacy could work, even in East Harris County.
I was like, it can be done. It wasn't like our long history of just being blown off.
Carolyn was nervous when she approached Jackie after the meeting. Shy, even. She'd spent hundreds of hours poring over environmental reports and documenting pollution incidents. But she'd done those things in private. Talking about her work with someone as impressive as Jackie felt intimidating. Jackie Metcalf was 31 at the time. She had a presence, an unwavering belief in what she was doing. She came by it honestly. When she was 12, her parents bought their dream house in Highlands, near the San Jacinto River.
When we moved there, we, got chickens, started a garden. It was a hay farm. We had horses, and we had a water well that was described to us when we purchased the home as a pristine well. And we thought, hey, we've got this well, we're great.
But soon after they moved, Jackie and her parents developed health problems. Her dad was diagnosed with multiple myeloma, a blood cancer that's been linked to benzene exposure. Jackie and her mom often woke up in the middle of the night and ran to the bathroom, vomiting. Their cats and dogs were throwing up too. Their chickens lost their feathers. Jackie developed such debilitating knee pain that she had to turn down an offer to run track in college. Then, her knees gave out entirely. She needed a walker, sometimes even a wheelchair, and started having seizures. At one point, her mom had to carry her to and from her bed and accompany her to class. The doctors couldn't figure out what was happening.
I was 90 pounds. I was losing my hair. Not just the meat off my bones, the hair off my head. I had bleeding sores all over my body.
Despite her declining health, Jackie was set on graduating college. And that persistence probably saved her life. In an environmental geology class, she learned that the tap water in some parts of Houston was contaminated with radium. So she tested the water from her family's well. Nearly 24 heavy metals showed up in their water, and doctors found 19 of those heavy metals in Jackie's body. Some of them, zinc, copper, chromium, mercury, and arsenic, were in the Superfund site's northern pit, according to an EPA report released a few years later. The World Health Organization says long-term exposure to those metals can cause anemia, skin lesions, damage to the nervous system and gut, and even cancer. The pit, it turned out, was just a few miles from Jackie's backyard and the well that provided her family's drinking water. Carolyn met someone else at Jackie's meeting. As she and Bobby were getting ready to leave, Bobby introduced her to a bushy-haired man who'd spoken up several times that night, Greg Moss. Turns out, he'd worked with Bobby at an oil company back in the 80s. Greg seemed really wound up about the waste pits and the barges nearby. Obsessed, even.
They want money. They think that whatever they do is money into the company. It's good for them, and screw the community. It was a nice area and all that. And now what do we got to look at? Barges. And we had no say-so in that at all.
As Greg ranted, Carolyn saw herself in him. His fears sounded like her fears. His anger sounded like her anger. Greg saw something in Carolyn too. Something she hadn't yet seen in herself. That she could be the leader their community was missing. Carolyn's world was expanding, but something kept gnawing at her.
I'm going to Highlands to hear about the waste pits that's here in Channelview. And I said, why are we going to a different community to hear about our waste pits? Why aren't we having the meetings?
About a month later, in August of 2018, Carolyn got another sign from above. This one came in the form of a phone call from one of the lawyers she'd reached out to. He knew someone who might take her case. Call Lone Star Legal Aid and ask for Amy Din, he said. She's the one you need. Lone Star Legal Aid is a Houston-based nonprofit that represents people who can't afford a lawyer. It had just created a new environmental justice team, and Amy was a key part of it. A pit bull lawyer with a reputation for tenacity and fearlessness. Amy made an appointment to visit their home. But Carolyn and Bobby had been burned so many times that they didn't dare get their hopes up. The August heat was blistering that morning. Carolyn paced in her yard, inspecting her flowers, checking on the turtles Bobby kept in a shady corner, doing anything she could to keep from watching the clock.
When she actually walked through the door, I'm not a crier, but I was on the verge of tears. Even now, I get kind of choked up talking about it because it was to me, such a moment. You know, it was, you're drowning and you finally get the life ring around you and it's being pulled in. You're not just sitting there flouncing trying to catch it. You're actually being, towed in.
Amy was tall, with short, brownish-gray hair and round glasses. She told me that Carolyn had basically built the case herself.
Carolyn stopped them from the replat. She had it stopped, and she had their permits all tied up. Like, she almost won this fight without ever needing a lawyer.
I've never seen anything like it. It made me want to take the case because I want to help somebody that's trying to help themselves.
What angered Amy most was how Carolyn was treated by the government agencies that were supposed to protect her.
It wasn't just that the party across the street was a bad actor. The city and the county were complicit in it, and they knew what was going on, and they let it happen.
I asked Houston's planning department and Harris County's engineering department about their roles in the construction of Harley Marine's regional headquarters on Lakeside Drive. The city's planning department declined to comment. The county's engineering department sent a statement saying, the amended plat was approved because it met the requirements set forth by the Planning Commission and the Commissioner's Court. But the county didn't respond to questions about why Carolyn's deed restrictions had been ignored. Lone Star Legal Aid filed a lawsuit on Carolyn's behalf 5 months later, in January of 2019. The lawsuit's targets were Houston's planning department, which allowed Harley Marine to combine its plots through an amended plat, Harris County's engineering department, which issued the permits for Harley Marine to build its headquarters on Lakeside Drive, and Harley Marine itself. Greg was also battling a barge company in 2019, Buffalo Marine. Buffalo had been around since the 1930s. It already owned riverside property on Carolyn Street in South Channelview and was parking barges there. It also had ownership or operating ties to 5 other companies in the area. Now, some of those companies were buying up land in the river bottom and laying the foundation for bringing in a new fleet of barges north of the I-10 bridge. To do that, they needed permission from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers to dredge along the banks of the river. That way, they could park barges there. Dredging is the digging up and removal of mud, weeds, and trash from the bottom of a river. That's how the Houston Ship Channel was created. But dredging poses significant environmental risks. It can unearth natural and man-made contaminants buried in the underwater muck. The task is especially precarious when you're dredging just a few thousand feet from a Superfund site. At one point, one of the companies linked to Buffalo, a company called Holtmar Land, applied for a permit to dredge 50,000 cubic yards of material along one of its properties in the river bottom. That's enough gunk to fill 5 Goodyear blimps. Holtmar planned to dump the waste on its riverfront property, but documents show that the Army Corps was concerned about piling potentially hazardous waste on the banks of a river that's known for flooding. So Holtmar withdrew its application. By January of 2019, Holtmar had come up with another plan. It would reduce the amount of material it dredged from 50,000 cubic yards to 31,000 cubic yards. And instead of dumping the waste near the San Jacinto, it would haul it to Beach City, a tiny town about 15 miles away. Holtmar wanted to dump the dredge material next to the town's only park. Because Greg lived near the original proposed dredge site, the Army Corps sent him a letter detailing Holtmar's plan. He didn't know anyone in Beach City, but the thought of exposing a new batch of children to toxins from the waste pits made him sick.
They were going to barge it down there and truck it and put it 3 feet deep next to this park where kids play. Come on, what's in there?
Greg told Jackie what was happening, and she contacted the town's city council. The toxins in the river bottom have done tremendous harm to my family and my community, she told them. You should all be alarmed, because if you don't do something, it's heading your way next. The city council passed a resolution opposing the project, and Beach City's 4,000 residents bombarded the Army Corps with public comments, demanding that the project be denied. Then, their U.S. congressman pressured the Army Corps to delay the permit. To Greg's amazement, their advocacy worked. 3 weeks later, Holtmar withdrew its application. Beach City gave Greg and Jackie plaques to commemorate what they'd done for the town. It's one of Greg's most prized possessions. Greg wasn't just concerned about the moves Buffalo Marine and its connected companies were making in the river bottom. It was how covertly they were making them. Buffalo's name isn't on any properties in the river bottom. Most deeds and titles, and practically all dredging requests, bear the names Holtmar and another company connected to Buffalo, Tim Tom Land Holdings. Just a quick note. The relationship between these businesses is a little confusing, but stick with me for a minute. It's important. The 2 names atop Tim Tom Land Holdings are Tim Studdert, the president of Buffalo Marine and the son of Buffalo's CEO, and Tom Marion, the former Coast Guard official who's Buffalo's vice president and lawyer. Tim and Tom. Tim Tom. The 2 names behind Holtmar are, again, Tom Marion and a longtime Channelview resident named Paul Holt. Holt and Marion. Holtmar. At first, Paul Holt was kind of a mystery man to me. A guy I kept hearing about, but never could get a hold of. I talked to about a dozen people who know Paul personally, but were afraid to go on the record. It's something I encountered a lot in Channelview. People don't like talking to reporters. But they all told me the same thing. Paul is Buffalo's man on the ground in Channelview. The local who brokers deals, especially land acquisitions, and especially in the river bottom. Greg calls Paul Buffalo Marine's fixer. He said Paul has tried several times to buy his land on Buffalo's behalf, but the price was so low that Greg said no.
He's a sorry son of a bitch, Paul is. And he does all the dirty work for Buffalo Marine. Anything that Buffalo Marine doesn't want bad publicity on, they get Paul Holt to do it.
Paul isn't mentioned on Buffalo's website or on Holtmar's tax registration with the state. Tom Marion is listed as Holtmar's primary contact, and the company is registered at his $1 million home. But Public Health Watch tracked down property records that list Paul as the president of Holtmar, and other documents that name Paul as an agent of Marion Maritime. That's another company connected to Buffalo that's run by Tom Marion. Tom wouldn't confirm Paul's employment history with Buffalo or the companies it's connected with. In fact, Tom stopped answering my emails entirely after our one interview. But I know Paul has worked for Buffalo. Greg dug up a printout of Buffalo's, quote, shoreside contact numbers. It lists Paul as an employee with a company email and phone number. Paul's personal Facebook account has a picture of him posing with river bottom residents during a land acquisition for Tim Tom. You know the type of photo I'm talking about. A few people standing awkwardly in a title office, one of them holding a giant key. Joe Wagner, the guy Greg refers to as the mayor of the river bottom, is particularly upset about one of the sales Paul brokered with an elderly neighbor. Joe has lived in the river bottom his whole life and owns a number of properties there. He hates the way barge companies have taken over.
But Mr. Arnold up here, well, he's 90-something years old, and he's not doing good at all, but he sold all that property to Buffalo. Yeah. I am pissed over that. And that fucking Paul is the one that instigated the whole thing.
Because he was serving as like the middleman for all the sales and everything, right?
Yes. Telling everybody he don't own shit. Buffalo Marine is the man.
Joe shared a chilling story about the time Paul pulled up in his driveway.
Sitting right here drinking my coffee like I do every morning. This was about 8 o'clock. It's early in the morning.
Apparently, someone had complained to the county about Buffalo's efforts in the river bottom. Joe said Paul was searching for the person who ratted them out.
He thought that I had called the county engineering, which I did not. He got real pissed. Oh, he was a mad son of a bitch, man. He was. He pulls his truck in where he told me, this is your last time you'll be sitting out here. You're done. It shook me up so bad. He's ready to kill me. I looked him in the eye, and I told him, I said, all you are, Paul, you're a snake in the grass.
Then, Joe said, Paul went after his wife.
Then the next day's when he ran her off the road. In this Jeep right here. Ran her off the road up there at the goddamn Shell station. He comes sideways at her. She had to get off. I didn't say run her off, right? I shouldn't put it that way. But she had to get off the damn road in the ditch to avoid being struck.
I tried to interview Paul for this podcast so he could share his side of the story. I emailed. I texted. I called. I left voicemails. I even left a note for him at his work. When I finally got him on the phone, he said he couldn't talk then and would have to call me back. But his call never came. So I called him again.
Hey, Mr. Holt, how you doing today?
Good.
This is David Leffler. I called you last week, but you were a little bit busy. You told me to call you back.
Oh, yeah, I wouldn't be anxious. I really don't have any time.
Just want to ask you,
And he hung up on me. On March 17th, 2019, yet another fire struck the heart of the Texas petrochemical industry. It was at a facility owned by Intercontinental Terminals Company, about 4 miles south of Channelview.
That thick cloud of black smoke hanging over Deer Park, Texas, as a raging fire burns out of control at this chemical plant. 6 tanks now burning, filled with chemicals used to make gasoline, solvents, and glues.
The black cloud was so big that the National Weather Service tracked it for days. Deer Park residents were told to shelter in place, but nobody gave any warnings or instructions to people in Channelview, even as toxic firefighting foam flowed through Carolyn's neighborhood and ashes carpeted her yard. Carolyn is still upset about that fire. She keeps a jar of ashes in her living room as a reminder. But it was a much smaller incident a few months later that pushed Carolyn to follow Jackie's path of activism. The kind of incident Channelview residents put up with all the time. The kind that doesn't make the news. It happened on a muggy August evening. The type of Texas summer night where all you can do is hide inside and crank up the AC. Carolyn was watching the sci-fi show Stargate SG-1 with Bobby when the familiar stench of chemicals began burning her nose and stinging her lungs. She reached out for a glass of water and gulped hard. She glanced at the clock. 8:21 p.m. Of course, she thought to herself. Everybody in Channelview knows the drill. Plants and refineries tend to release chemicals into the air at night and on weekends, when the regulatory agencies aren't working. But this odor was especially powerful, and it had a tinge of sweetness that Carolyn had come to recognize as benzene. She grabbed her phone and dialed the number for Harris County Pollution Control.
It wasn't a light odor at all. I mean, we were physically affected by it. And that's what I told Pollution Control. We are feeling physically ill.
Carolyn was told an inspector wouldn't be sent out until at least the next morning.
The guy on the phone, we argued about it. There was no convincing him to come out. And I made the statement, so what happens when you do get out here and you have a whole neighborhood of sick and dying people? He didn't care. And that was the breaking point.
Carolyn had lived in South Channelview for more than 3 decades. She'd survived the river fire, the tanker truck explosion that nearly killed Bobby, more hurricanes than she wanted to count. But so often in life, it's the little things that push you over the edge. For Carolyn, that night was it. She'd had enough.
When you are told in so many words that you and your whole neighborhood don't matter, that you're inconsequential to their needs, it's just beyond words. I mean, it was just such a feeling. We are deemed less than worthless.
We asked Pollution Control about Carolyn's complaint. A spokesperson said it was handled properly. The agency doesn't send investigators out after business hours unless it believes there's an emergency or life-threatening event. They sent someone to Carolyn's house the next day. But by then, the smell was gone. A few days later, Carolyn got a call from the office of County Commissioner Adrian Garcia, a Democrat who represents her neighborhood. Garcia's staff had heard about the benzene leak and wanted to organize a community meeting. They needed Carolyn's help. The old Carolyn would have balked at this request, but this Carolyn was settling into her new role as a community organizer. She got to work the next day. The Channelview Fire Department agreed to host the meeting in its training room. Greg offered to send drone photos of the barges. She printed out hundreds of pages of handouts and called everyone she knew. Carolyn's message was direct. Channelview needs to stand up. On the night of the meeting, Carolyn felt dizzy, a little nauseous. She didn't do public speaking, and she certainly didn't do big crowds. But her perspective had changed. This meeting wasn't about saving her home from Harley Marine. It was about pulling the residents of Channelview together, the way Jackie had done for the people of Highlands. When Carolyn stepped into the meeting room, she saw Bobby, Greg, Jackie, and lots of other people.
It was amazing. We had our naysayers who was saying nobody was going to show up at all. We had a room that fit 50 people. Those chairs got filled up. We put out a few more chairs. Those chairs got filled up. In the end, there was standing room only. When you talk about a history of a community that's given up, that has said, what's the point? No one's coming to our aid to fill a room. Then was even more shocked and amazed that they asked, when's the next meeting? They couldn't wait for the next meeting.
It had taken years, but Channelview had finally found its voice. Whether she liked it or not, Carolyn was it. Tropical Storm Imelda smacked southeast Texas less than a week later, on September 17th, 2019.
A tropical storm is hitting America's fourth largest city tonight. Imelda formed just a few hours ago, and it intensified rapidly, targeting the Houston area with life-threatening flash floods.
Greg watched the floodwaters creep toward the deck he'd rebuilt after Harvey just 2 years earlier. One of his greatest fears was about to become a reality.
9 barges broke loose from their moorings in the San Jacinto River during the height of this storm, and they just went careening down the rising river. 2 of the vessels actually struck both the east and the westbound bridges of Interstate 10.
The situation was even worse than those first news reports indicated. 11 barges broke loose near the river bottom. 6 of them crashed into the I-10 bridge's support beams. And 2 of them, both loaded with chemicals, got wedged under the bridge.
Right now, on the east side, I-10 at the San Jacinto Bridge is shut down indefinitely in both directions.
Now, the Coast Guard says there is no public health threat right now.
That last part, the no public health threat part, wasn't really accurate. One of those loose barges had rammed into the northern waste pit, the Superfund site filled with dioxin, the one the EPA had been watching since 2008. Days later, the EPA held a community meeting in Highlands to try to reassure people. The agency's project manager maintained that, despite the barge's impact, the cap on the northern waste pit showed no obvious damage. Jackie was suspicious. The pit had been punctured by Hurricane Harvey's floodwaters, but it wasn't punctured after being hit by a barge?
If you take a barge that's loaded with product, even a empty barge, and beach it on top of that pit, that puts that pit at risk of a complete destabilization. Its outer walls are not strong enough to withhold something like that. They were not built to withhold that type of weight.
Jackie's organization had warned the EPA about this scenario for years. And now, it had happened. Not the big one, but a warning shot. A glimpse into what could happen someday if barges kept crowding into the San Jacinto. Jackie felt like screaming in frustration, in rage. But she refused to dwell on the pain.
I wouldn't be able to keep doing this work to the capacity I do if I allowed myself to deeply feel everything, because it's too much. I have to figure out a way how to kind of detach myself emotionally, because it's just too depressing.
We went back and forth with EPA Region 6, which covers several states, including Texas, for nearly a year. We sent over pages of questions about the waste pits, especially the agency's weak oversight and inaction by the companies responsible for cleaning them up. Region 6 declined our interview requests, and its emailed responses offered little clarity about the Superfund site's pending cleanup. The agency wouldn't confirm or deny whether the barge collision during Imelda had damaged the Northern Pit's temporary protective cap.
I'm gonna stop and get a bag of ice.
I actually got some ice.
Yeah, but you're icing them frozen things
No,
up to make drinks.
I got a partial bag of ice. I have a bag of ice.
A partial bag of ice.
A partial bag of ice.
Ice is $2. I can afford to buy
well,
a
I had
bag
a bag in my freezer, so I grabbed it. But
after Imelda, the bond between Carolyn and Greg tightened. Carolyn doesn't use social media. Honestly, she's pretty paranoid about putting anything personal online. So while she planned the chick meetings, Greg posted the announcements and updates on Facebook, all while pushing her to get out of her shell.
She's just real goody-goody who tries to be real nice to everybody and everything. And, you got to have an asshole to tag along behind her, So here I am.
By the spring of 2021, Carolyn's group had established itself as the first public advocate for Channelview. They'd chosen a name, the Channelview Health and Improvement Coalition, or CHIC. At first, their goals were modest: putting up Christmas decorations around town, organizing trash cleanups. Sometimes several dozen people showed up to the monthly meetings. Other times, only a handful came. Someone from County Commissioner Adrian Garcia's office made it to every meeting. A second county commissioner who'd been elected to represent Channelview, Republican Tom Ramsey, sent representatives too. Carolyn brought snacks, a cooler full of soft drinks, and stacks of meticulously detailed handouts she'd printed at home. Greg was the first one there and the last to leave. The improbable friends had become a duo.
I mean, I'm laughing at myself, I guess. But.
That's what it's all about, I guess.
That year, 2021, there was another fire at K-Solve, the chemical distribution and barge cleaning business, down the street from Carolyn's house. George Galindo, who also lived near K-Solve, was working on his latest custom smoker when he heard explosions.
I looked to my right and I just seen the whole sky black, and it just kept on getting worse and worse.
We're back following this huge industrial fire in the Channelview area. This entire block looks to be on fire, and it is a monster with all of that thick black smoke.
Unfortunately, covering industrial fires in Harris County is not an uncommon thing. But Don, I don't remember the last time we saw something this huge on fire.
George rushed inside to check on his 2-year-old son.
That's a chemical storage facility, and you wouldn't want to breathe that in. I couldn't leave. I was just here. I don't want anything that harms my son.
Carolyn and Bobby were visiting their kids in the Houston suburb of Atascocita when they heard the news.
This is a massive fire. We're hoping that it doesn't skip the road that is between it and all of these chemical tanks.
I'm also concerned about what's in the air that so much of the city is now going to be breathing because of that smoke that's going up.
Bobby and Carolyn rushed home. While he drove, Carolyn called their neighbors. They dealt with the K-Solve fire back in 2007, but this one sounded much worse. They found a thick layer of soot in their yard. An oily residue coated their rain barrel. But the house wasn't damaged, and their pets were safe. According to an investigation by the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, or TCEQ, the K-Solve fire burned for nearly 3 hours and released more than 160,000 pounds of volatile organic compounds, including chemicals that can cause nerve damage, headaches, and irritate the eyes, nose, and throat. A separate investigation by the U.S. Occupational Safety and Health Administration found 5 violations at the facility and fined K-Solve about $29,000. The TCEQ eventually fined K-Solve a little over $11,000 for the fire and for reporting it late. But that was pretty much it. Since then, the TCEQ has given K-Solve a permit to open a new chemical tank wash facility in Channelview. Over the past year, we've sent dozens of emails to K-Solve and its CEO, Todd Riddle, including interview requests for this podcast and for the company's response to its 2021 fire. The company declined to answer those questions on the record. But K-Solve has responded to other Public Health Watch stories about high levels of benzene the TCEQ recorded outside its facility as far back as 2005. Todd refuted those findings. He said other businesses and nearby chemical barges are also sources of benzene emissions in the Channelview area. About a year and a half ago, we asked Todd about the location of K-Solve's new facility, which washes hazardous chemicals out of large tanker trucks. It's next to a cluster of homes and the neighborhood park where families and children gather. Todd said the property is zoned for industrial use and that the location is convenient and serves the company's needs.
If you're trying to suggest that we don't care about the community or we do things without regard to the community, you're free to write that. Go right ahead. It's not the case. We don't ignore the community. In fact, we do quite a few things to take into account the health of our workforce and our community.
K-Solve also sent a statement saying, "We will continue to work in partnership with the TCEQ and invest in technology to protect our employees, neighbors, and the environment." In 2022, companies connected to Buffalo Marine made another move in the river bottom. After Holtmar's Beach City plans were blocked, it presented its 4th set of dredge plans to the Army Corps. Again, the goal was to dredge along land the company had bought north of the I-10 bridge. This time, Holtmar wanted to dig up about 15,000 cubic yards of material. Far less than in its previous applications, but still enough to fill more than 1,000 concrete mixer trucks. It planned to dump the waste on a lot it owned in the tiny town of Devers, about an hour away from Channelview. For Greg, it felt like Beach City all over again. Except this time, the targeted community was even more vulnerable. Devers is in rural Liberty County and has fewer than 400 residents. Its mayor is a 58-year-old elementary school teacher named Stephen Harlisa. He talked to our podcast producers about feeling abandoned by state and federal agencies.
We've contacted TCEQ and asked them, could you please require current testing so we know the safety of this? And we were told that, that's an Army Corps of Engineer decision. No one's going to take responsibility and actually try and figure out, is this really safe or not safe? We asked for a public hearing so we could have our questions answered. The Army Corps of Engineers refused.
Greg was angry about something else. One of the companies affiliated with Buffalo Marine, Tim Tom Land Holdings, had bought the Riverside Inn and the land surrounding it. Tim Tom had given the restaurant a new name. It's now the Riverside Seafood and Grill, and promised to keep it open. But the fixture from the San Jacinto's Sunsplash glory days now belonged to the petrochemical industry that had driven boaters and swimmers from its waters. Greg suspected Buffalo would eventually park its barges right along the property. In a story like this, it's easy to get caught up in the action. The catastrophic accidents, the head-scratching decisions by regulators. the relentless expansion of the petrochemical industry. But all that action makes it easy to lose sight of the little moments. The moments where the technicalities of regulatory responsibility and permit applications melt away. And for just a few seconds, you step into the shoes of people who are just doing their best in life. People who love their community despite its scars, despite its pain and imperfections. One of the moments I keep coming back to took place on an oppressively hot summer afternoon. It's the moment when I realized just how dangerous things could become if barges are left unchecked in the river bottom. I was sitting on the wooden patio of the Riverside Seafood and Grill with Cynthia Benson, one of the people who made me fall in love with Channelview.
What's your go-to?
Oh, I've had a little bit of everything. Redfish is great. Tilapia is great.
She lives near Carolyn, about a block from K-Solve, but she grew up in the river bottom. In many ways, Cynthia embodies her community. She's small, less than 5 feet tall, with long graying hair and an undeniable charm. She's also tough. For years, she owned and operated an all-female bail bond company, Big Heart Bail Bonds. I first met Cynthia at the Starlight Bar, which quickly became my go-to spot for cold beer and conversations with locals.
So his girlfriend, of course, is one of my best friends. I called Tricia and I went,
She made sure to introduce me to everyone there. Muscle-bound bikers, truck drivers, pool sharks, and plenty of Channelview old-timers. Several people thought I was a cop. Everyone was leery of the overly friendly stranger who took his dog everywhere. But Cynthia, it was as if she'd been waiting for someone to ask her about the pollution in Channelview. Her anger and her sadness poured out every time we shared a bucket of Bud Light. Those feelings boiled over on that hot summer day when we split some tacos and a burger at the Riverside Seafood and Grill. I'd hung out near the restaurant before, waiting to talk to Greg, or just observing the barges that seemed to multiply each time I visited. But this was the first time I'd been there for a meal. The small one-story building is lined by wooden piers. The patio where we sat is right on the river. The sound of water lapping against the shore brought back Cynthia's childhood memories of the old Riverside Inn.
people were here all the time. And the hamburgers are the little round ones, greasy, with grease would run down your elbow, you know. It was unbelievable. It really was.
What I saw didn't match Cynthia's memories. The drone of passing tugboats created a nerve-rattling cacophony. About a dozen barges were moored in the middle of the river, just a few hundred feet away. A long line of train cars, filled with volatile chemicals and gases, rolled by on a trestle bridge just behind them. And there was a weird odor.
Do you smell that?
See? Look. Right now, we are smelling pollution. And we're looking at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 barges and a tugboat that's still pushing on something over there. You just got a good whiff of it, didn't you? Right. And that is all the time, David. It's all the time. At any given moment, they damn sure let that nasty, eye-burning, throat-burning stuff out.
What Cynthia said next was something I'd never been told before. Something that reminded me just how much journalism matters.
The first time I've ever heard of anybody trying to do anything was when I met you. That is the first time I have ever heard of anybody trying to do something about what's happening here. My whole childhood, wonderful place that I lived is not gone to shit. They are killing people legally. They should be charged with murder. And as a bail bondsman, I know You ought to be fucking charged criminally. A paycheck to paycheck person that is being affected by all of this feels like they have no power. And they don't. They know they don't. I know I don't.
We sat in silence after that. I'd lost interest in my Tim Tom burger, an homage to the restaurant's barge company owners. Cynthia sipped her vodka soda and batted back tears. I described that meal, Cynthia's fears, the stench we smelled, to Tom Marion during our one interview.
There's a family restaurant. You can bring your kids down there.
I asked if he worried about exposing the restaurant's employees and patrons to the chemicals that drift into the air from all those barges and tugboats.
I mean, it's not zero emissions, but the emissions is far less than what you see from a rail car or truck. I mean, you're going to get that if you drive past a refinery. It exists. It exists. I don't know how. There's no way you can eliminate it altogether. There is a nexus between rates of cancer in certain communities and where they are in relation to certain facilities. How vulnerable that person is, if you will, physiologically to cancer, and that's a whole nother area. And again, I'm not being dismissive. It's different for everyone.
My interview with Tom and my meal with Cynthia showed me just how wide the chasm is between the haves and the have-nots in this story. For the businesses pushing for new developments and profiting from them, it's exactly that, business. But for the people who live in environmental justice communities like Channelview, the pain of industrialization is personal. The changes are traumatic. The consequences, literally life and death. And they just keep coming. In August of 2023, the Texas Department of Transportation announced a big project near the river bottom. The state is going to raise and expand the I-10 bridge. The bridge Greg once believed would shield his slice of the world from an industrial takeover. The announcement said the decision was triggered by, quote, repeated barge traffic collisions with the bridge structures. A Transportation Department spokesperson told me that barge companies helped influence the decision. Tom Marion said Buffalo Marine was among those who weighed in.
We sat down with them and we go back and forth trying to figure out what makes sense for all the parties. Like any other constituent, we provide them feedback.
But some constituents, namely the residents, weren't asked for their input. Carolyn, Greg, Jackie, they'd all heard talk about the project, but they found out about its approval the way I did, through a press release. The more than $550 million undertaking will open a barge superhighway to the river bottom. It felt like the final stake in the heart of Channelview.
I expect probably a very short time for there to be a major incident. It's a disaster waiting to happen, and they're just contributing to the magnitude of the disaster. They're adding the fuel and lighting the match. And us that are around here, will be the ones who suffer from it. We're just sitting ducks.
Next time on Fumed, Greg's feud with the barge companies costs him everything he owns, leaving Carolyn wondering if she's the next target.
I'm going to end up on death row. If he smart mouths me, I'll kill the motherfucker. Man, that's just plain and simple. Because then I'm getting fucked on this deal real hard.
Fumed is a production of Public Health Watch. It was written and reported by me, David Leffler. Additional reporting by Savannah Strott and Salina Arredondo. Susan White was my editor. Our executive producer was Jordan Gass-Pooré. Our senior producer was Salina Arredondo. Savannah Strott was an assistant producer. Jana Cholakovska and Jordan Gass-Pooré provided additional research. Our music was composed and performed by Michael Ramos. Additional music by Epidemic Sound. Mark Bush was our sound engineer. Fact-checking by Enna Alvarado. Artwork by Matthew Fleming. Special thanks to our distribution partners at Texas Public Radio and to the Texas Tribune for studio and technical support. Also, thanks to Joanne Farian, Lynn Perry, and Chris Worthington for their advice and encouragement. Jim Morris is the Executive Director and Editor-in-Chief of Public Health Watch. To see pictures of Carolyn and Greg and learn more about Channelview, go to fumedpodcast.com. Hey, it's David again. I hope you'll consider donating to Public Health Watch, the nonprofit news outlet that produced Fumed. Go to publichealthwatch.org to contribute. Thanks.